So we're going to move on to our next part of this morning's proceedings, and it's just my great pleasure to welcome our next guest, Claire Kinneavy, to the stage. I've known Claire since I started in Arthritis Ireland, and we've worked together a lot over the years, particularly in relation to our self-management programme, and I'm delighted to call her a friend that I have made through my Arthritis Ireland work. Claire has lived with rheumatoid arthritis for 40 years, so I think as it is our 40th anniversary that we're celebrating, I couldn't think of a better person to come and share their personal journey with you today. So it's a huge warm welcome to Claire. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you very much, Grania, for that warm introduction. It's really my pleasure to be here. I couldn't think of a nicer group of people because I've made so many friends through the years, okay? So I just want to warn you that Simon has told me there's a trapdoor underneath the stage, but I've already checked underneath the pelmet and I know there's no trapdoor, so I may have to be wrestled off by you guys. So Arthritis Ireland boasts that they have patients involved. There's nothing about us without us. So it's been my pleasure to wrestle my way in there and to be involved like the rest of you. So my history started way back 40 years ago. So just to give you the family health history, because you know the way we are always asked, so any history of arthritis in your family. So that's a picture of my parents on wedding day in the early 50s. And the history is on my father's side. So I had 5 brothers. One has since passed away, but 7 in family altogether, 1 sister and 5 brothers. So I survived growing up with 5 brothers and boarding school. So it really equipped me very well for the battle with rheumatoid arthritis. So my diagnosis of rheumatoid arthritis came as a very unwelcome piece of news, because I was just 4 years working as a home economics teacher, a career that I really wanted to get into. I was so happy being in college that I used to climb 2 steps of the stairs to get to whatever class or whatever I went to. So I was on maternity leave and I had a 4-week-old baby when I had the very first symptoms of it. And luckily for me, I had a very good GP who recognized the signs and the symptoms. And he already started telling me that the medication I was more than likely going to be put on was gold medication, but that it's way more refined than it was when he was training. When he was training, he said patients' skin used to start peeling off. But he was giving me good news, and he said there's been lots of research recently, he said. So that's the kind of message I went away with. And when my son was only 10 weeks old, I was admitted to hospital and told, quite frankly, because your myriad of symptoms are both sides of the body, I'd lost weight and I was extremely fatigued. He said, obviously, it's rheumatoid arthritis. So what I did as a natural optimist at that time, in that bed, after getting the diagnosis and before even my visitors come in, I would have visualized a time in the future because my GP had already sown those seeds in my mind and I felt I'd cling on to that. So, but I also envisaged that if I couldn't continue working in my job, because my job was of a very practical nature, I was a home economics teacher, so I was used to managing classes of 24 students maybe, all doing practical work in the classroom, all maybe cutting out things, fabrics on the ground, and I would be down there with them and everything else. So I thought, if I can't continue doing that, I'd like to do something for a patient organisation. Little did I know, Arthritis Ireland was only 3 months old at that stage. So I was diagnosed in the August of 1981. And so that visualization really helped me in the initial stages, and it kept me going for the first 10 years. So what did I do? I did what most of us do when we get a diagnosis of arthritis. I tried to cover up the amount of pain I was in. I tried to keep up with everybody else, and I looked for a cure. And so like the rest of you, you're all told to go here, there and everywhere and try this, that and the other. And so my GP obviously was a key person, but I still tried the cures and so on. When my family and friends came to visit, I had these little cartoons, by the way, drawn up many years ago, but when my friends came to visit, I'm the lady standing beside them all sitting on the couch, because I would probably have made a meal for them. So I was trying to keep up and prove to myself that I was just as good as I had been, okay? And looking for a cure, of course I was, but I'd heard about Arthritis Ireland and seen a leaflet in the rheumatologist office, so I clung to every word in the leaflets, in the booklets, about the symptoms of rheumatoid arthritis, and I said, oh yeah, this is it, okay? So I'm going to talk about each decade because there's a kind of a theme to each one. And in that first decade, even though I was an interfering, I was an optimist, for me the rheumatoid arthritis was like an interfering front seat passenger in a car. Very unwelcome, when you're learning to drive and everything else, and you've this person commenting on you, knocking away at your confidence and everything else. So I had this little cartoon image drawn up. So it's like, here I am, the clouds start to get more gloomy and everything else, and this interfering diagnosis was there sitting in the front wheel with me. But I had to keep going, because initially I was actually breastfeeding that baby. I had to wean him overnight to start on steroids. My mother helped me. She had been a children's nurse and a midwife, helped me wean him overnight. And, she was in great pain looking at me, because she knew the amount of pain I was in. She said they used to nurse the children at the time in blankets. And this was in England. So they used to nurse the children with arthritis in blankets, and I knew it was causing her intense pain and the rest of my family as well. So I covered up even more. And so in the 80s, we didn't have anything like the wonderful equipment that all the mummies have now. We had prams, and I used to literally lift the pram off the big wheels and pop it into the back of the car. Needless to add, there was no safety belt or anything like that. The pram was in the back of the car when you were going to visit family and everything else. So there was no fancy buggies. They were all very difficult. But I kept on doing that, okay? And then there was lots of catastrophizing going on around me. So sorry that I'm a little bit short-sighted, so I have to turn to here. So everybody who said to me, oh, you're too young to have arthritis, that piled on the guilt even more. So the guilt that I had was like a layer, like the biscuit cake that we're going to get later on, just to whet your appetite. The icing on the top was the optimism, and underneath that there was a myriad of feelings, emotions underneath. But underneath all that chocolate, was the guilt that I had. I was overwhelmed. You couldn't have arthritis. You're too young to have arthritis. So that made me feel guilty, as well as everything else. And also, when you recover from having a baby, you sort of envisage yourself, being able to just fly around and do this, that and the other. But for me, it was even difficult sometimes taking him out of the cot at night time to feed him. And the Calpol bottles were another battle altogether. I remember being on my own with a crying baby with the temperature and not being able to open the Calpol bottle, and I felt like flinging it against the wall. Everybody would have said to me then, even though underneath it all I had all these concerns about would I be able to have another child, etc., and people would have said, maybe have another baby and it'll go away. So I listened to that so many times that when I did have another baby, I got a shock, because some of that did sink in. And so, just within days of giving birth 3.5 years later to my second child, to my daughter, I would have had very good pregnancy and everything else, but I would have had a really bad flare-up, like the power went out of my hands overnight and had difficulty lifting the baby, etc., etc. The treatment I was on at the time, I had gone off, obviously, the gold medication to start on the new treatments, back on the gold again after the baby was born. So this hugely affected my self-esteem. So underneath it all, even though I was keeping up a really brave face, my self-esteem wasn't so good. And then, like Geraldine said, lots of people would have been saying, oh, the drugs are worse than the disease, they'll do terrible damage to you and everything else. So, that was difficult. And then you were concerned about the RA gene. So this RA gene that came from my father's side, this, could I pass this on to my children? And I have to say, it was something I considered when we discussed, whether we'd have another child or not. I didn't want to pass it on to anybody else. I didn't want them to go through the horrendous pain, etc. So for the first decade, I was treated on the disease-modifying anti-rheumatoid drugs and anti-inflammatory medication, which I didn't like too well, and my stomach didn't like it. And in fact, I developed a duodenal ulcer. So they were given up after, the 10 years after I developed the duodenal ulcer. And I'm really pleased to say that I've coped very well without anti-inflammatories in the meantime. I would have been on steroids, so I had lots of intra-articular injections when I had knees full of fluid, that I could barely get out of the car, and Baker's cysts would develop, etc., etc. And then during big flare-ups, then I was on steroid tablets. So as well as maybe limping around and having some changes in my hands, etc., I would have a nice big moon face and had to change into a slightly bigger size of clothes. So there's a bunch of photographs in our albums at home that I don't particularly like and I'd like to destroy. So the second decade then, so for 10 years I had a really brave face, and this optimist in me, stiff upper lip, didn't cry too much or anything like that. But when the first suggestion came that there was actually a lot of damage done to my joints, so like I say, I was covering up the amount of pain I was in, so there was gross damage to my wrists. I remember reading the x-ray results, gross damage to the wrists. And the first operation I had just removed the radial head. Then I had my elbow replaced when I was just 35 years of age. So it took 11 years for all that damage to be done. And that's a time when I really reached rock bottom, because I thought I was going to be 59 and a half when I would need my first surgery. That's the kind of vision that I had. So I had my elbow replacement, and it was particularly difficult recovering from that, because some of you may know that if you're younger and you're having replacement surgery, it's harder for the surgeon to get it out of you, because obviously, your muscles and everything like that and tendons are all very strong. And it took him 5.5 hours to try and get the new elbow in. And the rehab was really difficult. And I hated being away from my children and in Harold's Cross trying to get this elbow moving again. Thankfully, it lasted 18 years and I had a new one since. So during that time then, whilst having other surgeries done like Boutonniere's correction, and had a fusion of a thumb on my left hand and so on, and knuckle replacements, 4 knuckle replacements on my right hand. But sadly, my brother was then diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. So of course, Mum said that's from Dad's side of the family. Okay, so on top of everything else, but it was great because I was able to understand and our family knew about it. So this was timely because Arthritis Ireland introduced a pilot education programme. It was a programme where you would learn how to improve your confidence. And I've just forgotten the name for a moment, what it was advertised as, but it was advertised in the magazine that if you paid €10, you could get on this pilot program. So it was the best €10 that I ever spent, because they said, if you do the pilot program, then we might train you as a leader. So in the 90s, that's what I did. I did the Arthritis Self-Management program, and for me, it was like I'm in this car, the red car that I love, the little sports car. So it was like the course was as if for me, I pulled in that car, got hold of that interfering front seat passenger, put it into the back and gagged his mouth and everything else. But like a good driver, you always have to use your rear view mirror, and I could never forget that I had it. So it taught me to be more mindful about my disease. But what the course did for me was, it taught me how to understand my pain cycle and how to cope with it and how to break it, etc. So I wasn't being very nice to myself. It was hard for me to open up jars and things like that, or hard for me to cut things. When I did the course, I had reached rock bottom. I'd reached a point where I didn't care less whether I lived or died. And so I went out and I bought my ergonomic knives and things like that. I was kinder to myself. So I met some lovely people, and every Christmas I exchange Christmas card with somebody that I did that program with. So this was really wonderful for me. So it made things an awful lot better for me, you know, and it gave me a focus. And then I started to train to deliver the program. And what actually happened with that was Arthritis Foundation at the time were trying to charge people about €45 to do the course, but I kind of kindly told them in the office that people couldn't afford that. So I approached the local HSE office and asked them for money, and they gave me a grant. And so we kept the grants going in Kildare, and to this day we still get that same grant rolls in every year from the same department in HSE to the Arthritis Ireland Kildare branch, which is wonderful. So I was allowed to continue that for a while, and really pleased when Arthritis Ireland made a decision to put it back on the agenda again. And one of my colleague friends, one of my patient partners, Mary Healy, had also trained as a self-management leader at the time. We persecuted everybody on the board until they brought it back, and Grania did a lot of the groundwork and then got the thing up and running again. So it was wonderful. Now, at the same time then, there was lots of more research had come along. So with that improved medication, it allowed us to put that interfering front seat passenger in the boot of the car. Okay? In the boot. So less obvious that there was something there, but you still had to be mindful what you had in the boot, okay? So what sort of an impact? So even though I'd learned new skills and everything else, this is the impact that it had. So here I am in the picture with two of my fellow RA people that I met through the helpline. We're on a little visit to Kildare Village there. They came down to visit me. But I would say that, you know, RA, one of the things it does, it kills the joy. It's a killjoy, and it's a time stealer, and it's a money robber. So, you know, it interrupts the whole family dynamic. So if you were the one doing the gardening, you know, you can no longer be that. You were the one maybe doing all the night feeds and everything else, you mightn't be able to do that. Or you have babysitters. I remember having to get a babysitter to come in and mind the baby while my husband was playing a football match, because my wrists were so bad that I couldn't actually lift him up. So a babysitter came in really to look after the baby while I was there. So that's some dynamic mess up, isn't it? You know, you'd have all the cancelled social occasions, robbing that joy, the fun you'd have of parenthood. And it's lovely to see occupational therapists like Yvonne Codd doing her PhD on this very subject, you know. You know, I wouldn't have gone to music festivals or concerts or things like that because I wouldn't be quite sure. I've never walked the Burren because my feet would be too sore and my knees would have been too full of fluid, etc., etc. You know, places that I felt I couldn't visit, I wouldn't have had the confidence to do it. I remember vividly dining out for special occasions and throbbing pain underneath the table in my feet or my knees, and then feeling conscious that when you'd get up, you might waddle away and somebody would, what's wrong with you? Did you hurt yourself? Did you sprain yourself? Or whatever. You know, simple tasks become really hard work, and you might order something in a restaurant and realize, oh my God, I forgot that my jaw was so painful. I can't actually eat that, really. I can't get my mouth around that. I have to ask for a steak knife because I can't cut the chicken. Okay? So it really interrupts all of that. You know, you last the pace and then you suffer the next day. But I've learned that I do that. And in fact, I'm still keeping up and covering up. And, you know, this is one of the things I have to try and check myself with. You know, I'm still overdoing it. I'm still trying to prove that I'm okay. The money stealer. We could write lots about that. I was really privileged to have a salary protection scheme, which is why I give my voluntary time to Arthritis Ireland, because I've met so many people who haven't been able to work. I had to give up work within 4 years of being diagnosed, and but I was lucky that I had that, and I know so many people don't have. So there's a lot of time stolen from surgery. I did a presentation to somebody else, and I added up the number of months that there were, you know, in rehab or getting rid of flares and things like that, okay? So this was me volunteering in the 30s. I would have, my daughter's in the middle there, would have made those butterfly, it was Butterfly Day, so it was a fundraising, and that was really good. What I've been doing as well, I've been lobbying on access issues. So, for example, there I am involved with Newbridge Access Group, and I would have got funding from local authority, from Kildare County Council, to have arthritis-friendly seating put in the town. So I think that's a really important area. The volunteering has been really important for me, because when you have to give up your job, you have a label on you, couldn't work anymore. So really volunteering has filled a huge void in my life. It's connected me to community. I have met some wonderful people. I've been able to have all sorts of lovely experiences, get involved in organising exercise programmes. I didn't like being in Harold's Cross, but it was really helpful to me, and I loved all the therapists. I feel the walls in Harold's Cross understand. Everybody who walks in that door understands how devastating it can be. So we would organise with my Kildare colleagues over here. We have a good bunch of us here. We organise exercise activities. So that kind of peer support is really wonderful. It was a privilege to me when Professor Bresnan asked me to join the board of Arthritis Ireland. He treated me for over 20 years, and I am forever grateful to him for all his work, and for all the work that the rheumatology consultants and medical team do, and the research and everything else. So it's great to be a committee member and ambassador and everything else. So when the disease-modifying anti-rheumatoid drugs and biologics came along, it just meant I had less pain and swelling, fewer intra-articular injections, much better quality of life. In the third decade, here I am getting 2 knuckles replaced. So the reason I use this image is because it's like a boxing glove. It's a bloody battle, and it was like 4 decades of battle. So I was very proudly wearing that. At the same time, my mother was diagnosed with RA. So she still said my brother and myself got it from my father's side. She clearly got it from a fall the time she went away in the bridge weekend and slipped in the bath when she forgot to put the mat in. So she got it. She didn't pass it on to us, no. Okay, so the 4th decade, disease-modifying anti-rheumatoid drugs and biologics have given me a much improved quality of life the past while. Less pain, swelling, fewer injections, much better quality of life, much better exercise options. And I would have had, knuckles replaced, revision surgery on those, 4-foot reconstruction, revision elbow replacement, and so on. And that has really improved my quality of life, and even my choice of shoes that I can actually wear for the day. That's been great. So here's a nice image. There's my mother's hands. She lived until she was 91. She had rheumatoid for over 21 years, and she really benefited from the new medications. So look at her. They were about 88-year-old hands in comparison to mine. So a different decade, it makes a huge difference. So I have a son and a daughter. I've worried for so many years in case they developed anything, and I'm really pleased that they didn't. My daughter had her first child this year, and I was really pleased to see no RA emerging in the month after Zoe, my granddaughter, was born. They're my youngest nieces and nephews, and the reason I put that up in the slide is because I have 17 in all nieces and nephews, and I have about 10 grand nieces and nephews, and it would absolutely break my heart to see them or another one of my siblings developing rheumatoid arthritis. So really, this family legacy, this better future, I know I plagued you about it before as well, Jerry, all this research is so important. So finally, there's the car. What we can't forget is that even though the biologics are there, even though the combination therapies are working so well, that every now and again that little guy can, tap on the boot and the medication stops working. So it's up to us to get back to the rheumatologist, and that's where the helpline and all Peter's team come in about redirecting people back, that if they have these flares, you don't want any more of this permanent damage. So Arthritis Ireland has been a wonderful resource for me and so many others. I have to thank all my family and friends who've tolerated all the time that I spend away from home volunteering, and my volunteer colleagues are really marvellous, and my peer support group is a huge importance to me. They understand all our trials and tribulations, and obviously the team, and of course I'm forever grateful to Professor Kate Lorrig that she took on that task of developing a self-management programme in 1979. Thank you. The trapdoor definitely doesn't work.
Well, come on over and sit down. I think you've definitely earned yourself a seat at this point. I'm sure you've been standing a long time, Claire. What can I say? I mean, this woman is just a true inspiration. And I've heard Claire, I've had the pleasure of hearing Claire tell her story a few times, and it never, I find it a very emotional experience, I have to say. So thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Thank you.
And I think the first question here is so apt, because I've got to know Claire so well over the years, and one of the things that always strikes me is, how does this woman stay so positive all of the time? Like, she's very much the glass is half full person, if I met a person. So the first question here is, how do you manage to stay so positive despite everything that you've gone through?
It's in my DNA, and I'd say my mother would have thought it was from her side of the family that I got that. So, it's in my DNA for a start, okay? So I am optimistic by nature. I reinforced during the self-management program, we teach people how to change negative thoughts into positive thoughts. So I'm not always, feeling positive and optimistic or whatever, but when I'm feeling, maybe not so confident about things or whatever, I let it out, I let it go. I have my peer support group to talk to about that, but I also feel it's not just the DNA, it's that I have met so many people in a much worse position. And through my voluntary work with Arthritis Ireland, I met people with much more severe disease than I did, with very poor outcomes. One lady that I tried to support with the branch for many years, was dead by the time she reached 50 because her general health was poor as well. She did smoke too, but she was unlucky to get infections, chronic infections, and so on. So I feel that I am blessed, for all that I have. And I think a bit like a clockwork mouse. The way clockwork mouse goes, and when I'm being positive and everything, I'm like it flying across the thing, and then every now and again it stops. So during that time, I think I sort of regenerated, whatever. I do have very good support from family and friends, and we can joke about it all and that sort of thing. And
you mentioned in your, that it's, your first part of that, your answer to that question was sort of, it's in your DNA. So for, some people do find it really hard to be positive. For those people who maybe are not necessarily there, it's not how they start out. They're not generally a positive person to start out with, because I think you would often say that you always try really hard to have a positive outlook. What would be your tips for somebody who's just not in that? They just find it really hard to, I suppose, to change their kind of attitude towards their particular situation.
Well, I suppose, I think, counselling may actually help with it, because like all those emotional feelings that Tim talked about in the beginning, that Peter talked about and everything else, there could be a lot of stuff in there that needs to be healed, emotional healing. And I'm very proud to say that we've 2 people who worked with me on the helpline who then went on and trained as counsellors, as professional counsellors. So I think, that's really important. So if somebody is feeling, and there can be so many things that can be negative, we could be, I always compare myself to other situations. If I was a person with rheumatoid left in Ukraine, I always think of people that are worse than myself. I think that can help, but also writing down the positive things, and that we talk about a gratitude journal in self-management, the important things to try really hard. And if at the end of the day you can't think of 3 things, you write the same thing down 3 times. One thing, and be grateful for that. But, I think it does help to think of other people, but also what can actually help you and what can give you strength is reaching out to somebody else, opening up about your feelings, getting support, getting acknowledgement for how you might feel, how really horrible you might feel about having this, being true and honest. We like to do it in Kildare during our exercise programs, while we're walking and stuff like that. We might talk about it. Or there's people who don't live near me that, are my peer support as well. And, we just talk, we're just acknowledging each other's feelings. That's all, validating how the person feels. Maybe that, but do the self-management program, and if it doesn't work the first time, wait 6 months and do it again. Ring Peter a lot in the meantime, and talk to various people on the helpline, get them to listen to you, see if there's a therapist in the hospital who can help. Maybe you haven't availed. I availed of both private and public system. And it was actually my surgeon said to me, you know, you're very isolated in the private system. He said, I want you to come into a public clinic. I want you to meet I want you to meet the team. I want you to meet the occupational therapist and everything. I think he also wanted them to see my hands as well, because, you know, he wanted them to teach.
Teaching experience.
Or whatever, you know. But that has been a wonderful experience as well.
Yeah.
And like, it's my GP, I always think, you know, all the therapists that I had over the years, they were all the most important person in my life that week. Would say my GP was the really important person if I was having an issue that could be sorted by them. My rheumatologist is my go-to person. But there were other times when it was the occupational therapist was my champion, when the nurse was wonderful, you know, when the physio was wonderful, you know, when the counsellor, I would have got counselling when 10 years after, you know, when I first became really afraid about my disease, I would have gone for counselling. It really helped. The counsellor I went to knew nothing about arthritis, but he commented, oh, I was actually after being in town and I'd bought ergonomic knives. So he said, so you're trying to be good to yourself for a change, he said. He commented on that, you know. So be kind to yourself as well. And we talk about, you know, you asked one thing that you could do is actually write down how you really feel. Don't let anybody see it if you don't want them to. If you do want them to see it, it's a therapist maybe that should see it, or your partner, your loved one, family, trusted, somebody trusted. But, you know, write down how you feel and then burn it or shred it.
Yeah.
You know.
And I think that there's another question coming in here now. Probably be our final question before we break for lunch. But we sometimes look at arthritis. I mean, years ago it was probably a more visible disease in terms of the, you know, the destruction to the joints, particularly, for example, in relation to rheumatoid arthritis, etc. And now sometimes with the new therapies, we don't see the same. You know, it's not as maybe as visible as it was 30, 40 years ago. So did you find it difficult when people did not understand or could not see how much pain you were in?
Absolutely. Yeah, I did find that very difficult. And sometimes I would have voiced how I felt, but I think it's very sad to say that I was delighted when I saw changes in my hands. Delighted, pleased, bragged, proud of my hands. People used to say at the beginning, such and such, oh, your woman down the road has it, her hands are destroyed. And I remember thinking in my mind, I am not my hands, is the attitude I had way back in my 20s. I am not my hands, and I don't want to be seen for my hands. I'm not proud of my hands. The photographer had to guide me as to how I was going to hide my hand behind the cake when we were taking the pictures. You know, would I wear crochet gloves at a wedding, for example, to cover them up? But I was actually delighted that people could then see and understand, because you can't see it, you know. And it's when people say, oh, well, you look well. Oh, Lord, but you look great. So in your mind, in the early stages, you begin to think, they don't believe me. They think I'm putting it on. They think I'm malingering. What I say to people now when they say that to me, when people tell them they look well, sometimes people can misinterpret it, which is what I did probably. And I say to them, take that as a compliment. What they're telling you is, you've turned yourself out well today. You've washed, you put on a bit of makeup, you put on your favourite colour, you know. So take that as a compliment or whatever. Yes, it's very difficult when people don't understand, but look, sorry, Grania, I trained as a teacher and you told me it becomes obvious every now and again. But when they don't understand, they get it, they get an explanation.
Yes, they get a lesson.
And I can tell them about the research Professor Jordan McCarthy's doing, or that Jerry's doing, or that Doug Veal's doing, or whatever. And they hear all about rheumatology. Oh, by the way, when I was a student, I used to have to walk through James's hospital when I stayed. My sister was staying off the South Circular Road when I was in college. And I used to walk through James's. And there was a big building and it said rheumatology. And I said, God, I wonder what that is.
Yeah.
Sorry, and then it does help me as well that I see everything in cartoon images. So if somebody is, I think somebody's thinking that I actually have a cartoon image of how that looks.
I think everybody will be going away today with your cartoon image of hopefully of putting that little devil in the
the boot of the car and keeping it there. But
I
think that's
have
just-
another one. I do it for the Access Group as well, and it's something I've enjoyed doing. I mean, home economics was about being creative, and that allowed me to do that in the community. So around disability issues, I had fun coordinating a project which is all about disability awareness in a schools poster. And one images I've just resurfaced. There's an exhibition in Newbridge Library at the moment, and I was going to stick it in the slide, but I was afraid Tara would be upset. But it actually says, it's an image of a woman grimacing. It's a black and white image. I'll send it to you. Geraldine, you'll get it, and Professor Jerry Wilson. But it says, I'm really happy to see you again, but too firm a handshake can cause me great pain.
Yeah.
I'll share it with you.
Yes.
At some stage.
It was one of the biggest lessons I learned when I was within my first few weeks in Arthritis Ireland, and I met a member from our volunteer network, and he actually did put out his hand. And you know, when you meet somebody for the first time and you want to shake their hand, and I shook his hand, and he let out this huge roar, and I've never forgotten it. So I would be really careful when I meet somebody with arthritis. That was my early days. Thank you so much, Claire. Claire has put a huge amount of work into her presentation, as you would have seen this morning. Thank you so much for sharing your story. You really are just inspirational. So thank you. Thank you very much.